Jump over to some news that just came across our desk. There's been a police officer, a cop in Baltimore, who's been charged in the death of his 15-year-old stepson. They do say that he's being charged with first and second degree murder as well as child abuse. So let's go jump into that press conference that just took place. We're playing it out here for you on Live Now from Fox.
Office of the Chief Medical Examiner ruled Deshaun Jones, DJ's cause of death as asphyxiation, with the manner being homicide. Homicide detectives worked in conjunction with the State's Attorney's Office, obtained an arrest warrant charging Eric Banks with the following: first and second degree murder, as well as first degree child abuse resulting in death in regards to the homicide of DJ. The suspect, Eric Banks, is currently incarcerated at the Anne Arundel County Detention Center on a no bond status in regards to his original charges of During the evening of Tuesday, July 13th, members of the Anne Arundel County Sheriff's Office served the homicide arrest warrant on Mr. Banks. Now, just to be clear, even though an arrest has been made, this is a very active case as we stand before you today. We're urging anyone with information to come forward by contacting our homicide unit at 410-222-4731. Again, that's 410-222-4731. If people with information wish to remain anonymous, they could do so. There's a tip line you can call at 410-222-4700, or another avenue is Metro Crime Stoppers at 1-8667-LOCKUP. So again, that's the update that we have at this time. I just want to say there's not too many specifics we're going to be able to get into, as this is very active and ongoing in terms of questions around motive and things of that nature that I'm sure folks have. At this time, though, I would like to turn it over to Chief Alwood, who wants to speak to what she can too. She has a message for the community and the family, and also she'll mention some other details to the extent that she can. Chief.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to preface my remarks with the fact that this is absolutely a heartbreaking, traumatic, and horrific case. We continue to lift DJ, and I ask that the community does the same, his family, in prayer, as our hearts ache for his grieving mother and his younger siblings. Our hearts also go out to all who loved him, his Glen Burnie High School family, and his neighbors who loved him dearly, and the community at large. This was a young man with a bright future, yet his life, as his life was intended to live, was tragically taken. DJ had just completed his freshman year in the Biomedical Allied Health Program at Glen Burnie High School. He took great pride and excelled in his academics. He was a magnet student and was an accomplished violinist. And quite frankly, I can't think of any more beautiful an instrument to play than the violin. Speaks volumes to this young man's commitment and character. His friends have also spoken to his character as someone who would not hesitate to help others. He had a contagious smile and a very keen sense of humor. He was able to light up a room. Our crisis intervention team responded to the scene that evening. They provided assistance and support not only to the family, which was their first priority, but also to the community members, his neighbors, who were struggling with and processing what had just occurred with very little information. And then our officers, who experienced their own level of trauma in rendering first aid. I personally went to the scene that evening, and I could not be more proud of our officers and their response, their tenacity in exercising their due diligence in investigating this case. At any moment, they could have accepted an answer that they were given and walked away, and they did not. They kept asking questions. I can tell you there's body-worn camera footage of this incident that's part of the investigation. It's not something we'll be releasing. I can tell you what I saw briefly, and it simply highlights the incredible work of our responding officers. These officers canvassed the area, looking for DJ. They could tell something was awry, was amiss. Things just weren't adding up after speaking with the suspect, DJ's stepfather. And they were initially told by Mr. Banks that DJ left the residence without his belongings. But their persistence in canvassing the neighborhood ultimately led to a consent search, which led them to locate DJ in the home in an upstairs access panel to get to to get access to the attic. In the video, I can hear one of our officers calling out, "DJ, DJ." Mr. Banks was immediately taken into custody, only to become combative, extremely combative, and he attempted to disarm one of our officers. It took several officers to intervene to get Mr. Banks into custody. And again, please note that this case is very active, so there are things that we obviously can't speak to at this time. Personally, I'd like to thank, again, our officers and our detectives who worked around the clock on this case, our evidence technicians who processed the scene. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Office of the State's Attorney and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's Office in Baltimore for their coordination, cooperation, and lastly, the leadership for the Baltimore City Police Department. Again, I ask that we continue to uplift DJ's mom. She's a grieving mother. This is devastating for both she and her two young children. Today, we also have joining us Lieutenant Rich Albin, who's the commander of our Major Crimes Unit, assigned under our Criminal Investigation Division. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Any questions? Justin, go ahead.
We know from court records that there were protective orders, but as far as police involvement, have police been called to the home before?
There were prior calls for service to the home, but we're just not going to get into specifics in terms of the nature of those calls and some of the interaction with Mr. Banks or his wife, just because of the ongoing cases we mentioned. We don't want to be leading down that road at this time.
And if I can clarify the autopsy findings, asphyxiation could mean a couple things as far as I understand. Do you believe he was strangled? Is it possible he was drowned? Is there any clarity on that?
The evidence led to asphyxiation, and that's where we are right now. The investigation is ongoing and active, so we're just not at liberty to really get into more specifics right now, Justin, just based on where we're at.
Can you say, this was a prior call, were there any past reports that DJ may have been abused?
I don't have information on that. But, again, we have detectives that are looking at anything and everything related to this case. Any interactions the DJ may have had with family members, friends, Mr. Banks, his wife, everything at this point is on the table in terms of where the investigation is right now. But I just can't highlight that enough that this is where the evidence led to this cause of death in this manner, but it's very active right now where we're at.
You said that in the body-worn camera footage that you watched, there's this attempt to disarm the officers that were there. They showed great restraint. We hear of so many cases when somebody lunges for an officer's gun and essentially it's over. Could you describe that for us and the restraint that they used in not using their service weapons?
I can just say we, again, appreciate the officers' diligence, their efforts. Obviously, all officers are trained to retain their weapons. It's unfortunate that our officer was placed in that situation, and we're very proud of the way that our officers responded without having to utilize deadly force.
Just small clarification on that, too. Were the other officers at the scene at that time? Did they be requested, or was it like a brief standoff where he had called for help and then they arrived later?
So yes, there was a call for Signal 13. You heard Justin Mulcahy speak to that. For those who don't know, a Signal 13 is a distress call for officer in trouble. So there were moments where the officer was struggling, yes, with Mr. Banks.
But I mean, was it a continuous struggle, or did they back off and then the officers arrived and they took him into custody? Or?
I'd say it was a continuous struggle.
Thank you.
Could you describe at all the lengths that Mr. Banks had gone to cover this up? He said, he wasn't being forthcoming, I believe, according to his first question about police.
I can't go into the specifics, but I can say with confidence he was very deceptive throughout the engagement. Any other questions?
What else can you tell us about Mr. Banks?
Other than what we already know, he's a Baltimore City police officer, and I know that he is actively suspended without pay, according to the Baltimore City Police Department. Again, we can't speak to specifics right now. Our investigators are exercising again their due diligence. There will be no stone unturned, but it's still very much an active investigation.
Everybody good? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.